Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining our panel on embracing the circular economy. We'll be looking into challenges and opportunities that the circular economy brings for the mining industry. According to an OECD report from 2019, the current trajectory of population and economic growth, the use of minerals and metals will increase from about 45 gigatons in 2011 to about 109 gigatons in 2016. We also know from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development that in order to keep depleting the Earth's resources, we'll have to achieve a total recycling rate of about 80 to 90% on all materials by 2040. So as a consequence, we may see the demand for commodities from primary production initially grow strongly and then potentially decelerate. So what does the circular economy mean for the mining companies and for the industry, and what can they do to prepare themselves? We'll explore these questions today with an illustrious panel of experts. We have Tony Knight, Chief Government Geologist of the Geological Survey of Queensland, right to my left. Tony's career spans roles in mining operations, mining and energy services companies, exploration firms, and now at a government geoscience agency. Hermien, General Counsel and Executive Director at Vedanta Zinc International, has 20 years of experience of working in the mining industry and has held senior roles at Rio Tinto, De Beers, and PwC before. You're a frequent speaker at industry events and passionate about the contribution that the mining industry makes to broader society, and believes in-house counsel has a significant role to play in facilitating driving and growing ESG goals. Then we have Spano, Director of Innovation at the ICMM. You started your career in Peru and Latin America and the forestry and energy sectors before moving to renewables, power, and then for the last 10 years to the mining and metals industry. Shang is the Global Head of Mine Closure Planning and Circular Economy for Mining and ArcelorMittal. With 20 years of experience in the mining industry, is a member of several industry expert working groups related to environmental management, sustainable development, and the circular economy. In your current role, you're leading ArcelorMittal's mine closure planning practice and the circular economy initiatives related to mining. And last but certainly not least, Gareth, Chairman of the Board of 91. 91 is a global asset management firm with about 140 billion of asset under management. Gareth had spent most of his working life and in his 3-decade career in the mining industry, main executive roles at De Beers and Anglo American, last as a CEO of De Beers. And then for 9 years until March of this year, you were the chairman of Norilsk-Nickel. While we get started, I would like the audience for a quick response to our questions on Slido that should appear very quickly. What percentage of global copper demand will be met from recycled copper in 2025? So that's only a short period away. Choose from the 5 options that very shortly, I'm sure, are already appearing on that slide. Gareth, may I start with you? I think circular economy, we should start with a definition. What really does circular economy mean in the mining industry? We all think about recycling, but there are clearly other aspects as well. How would you define the circular economy?
Konrad, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon now. And great to be sharing with the panel on what is clearly a critical question. You know, I think if one is asked for a definition of the circular economy, one typically hears about the 3 R's. Of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And actually, if you spend a bit of time looking at it, you get 5 R's, 7 R's, or 10 R's. So there is many R's in this as you want to in terms of definitions. For me, I think the most important one when we're thinking about circular economy is around rethink. Because actually, every mining house, probably every mine, there's going to be a different answer for what the right journey is for that mine or that mining company in terms of the circular economy and what it needs to do. You've already put something up here, Konrad, but there was a fascinating article in the FT earlier this month on the number of new mining projects that would be needed to satisfy the net zero demands of the world. And I mean, to cite just a few, the world would need 78 new lithium mines or lithium projects. It would need some 60 cobalt, 72 nickel, and believe it or not, 108 new graphite mines or projects. So the one thing we know is that in terms of the contribution that mining companies make to the whole effort to net zero, the sheer provision of metals and minerals is going to be the number one job. So this isn't about whether the new economy or whether the circular economy needs metals and minerals. It's going to be about how they get provided. And for me, I think when thinking about the circular economy, as I said, it's a unique answer for every mining company. It's about macro and micro. There are a ton of micro initiatives that can be done in every location, around water, around supporting local communities, around how you generate energy and so on and so forth. And I'm sure we'll get into a lot of those discussions with some really good examples. And then there are macro projects. I was involved in a very interesting macro circular mining project up until February of this year with Norilsk Nickel. Norilsk has been one of the biggest polluters of sulfur dioxide in the world. And it's now engaged in the process of capturing the sulfur dioxide, converting it into sulfuric acid. It's developed a new lime mine, and if you put lime and sulfuric acid together, you get an inert product called gypsum. And gypsum is used for fertilizer and for building materials. So you've now taken a deeply noxious gas and you've turned it into two highly beneficial products. So as I say, I think there's a unique answer for each mining company, and I think there are lots of good macro examples and lots of good micro examples that one can draw down on. The last thing I just want to say, Konrad, is that this is not an easy journey. And the path is littered with examples of where mining companies have tried to do things that are out of their expertise and have failed. Because actually mining companies generally, if they stick to the knitting, are okay, and if they try and do things that are off-piste, often they fail. So for me, one of the key answers in the circular economy is around partnerships. So finding the right people to twin with, whether that's upstream or downstream in this process. And I corrupted an existing saying for the purposes of this discussion to say, it's not about the tyranny of the or, in this case spelled with an E, it's about the genius of the and. It's about us working together with the right partners in an and relationship up and downstream.
Thank you, Gareth. You're pointing to a number of interesting topics, new products, new business models, changes, new partnerships required. If we pick it up with you, I mean, on business model changes, I want to very quickly close out. Thank you very much for responding to the Slido. Just as a quick indication, the number was already about 30% in 2021. So we clearly hope to see increases beyond the 30% into the 40 and 50% of recycling rates going forward. But I mean, coming to you, mining traditionally today's business models are built on depleting finite resources. That will have to change. How do mining business models, how do companies' business models need to adapt and change, including with Gareth mentioned partnerships?
Thanks, Konrad. I just want to open by saying I heard some other speakers on previous panels today tackling this topic, and one of the things that has been said is that circularity is not something that is new in the mining industry. We have been doing a lot of the things that we will be talking about today, like reducing waste and tailings, looking at optimization of water use, regenerating sites, at closing of mining operations. Not only because we want to lessen the impact of extraction, but because it makes good business sense. Research has, however, recently shown that to reduce GHG emissions in the atmosphere, you will only achieve more or less a 50% reduction by implementing carbon reduction operational efficiencies, and, for example, adopting renewable energy solutions worldwide. So the balance of the 50% will have to be achieved by a different way in which we produce and consume resources. And that is where the circular economy presents an answer and a framework for radically changing the way in which we produce and consume. It calls for an entire re-evaluation of value chains, where waste is obviously designed out. This we've heard before. Products are looped back into the system. Growth is decoupled from consumption. And this is really what mining companies are currently sort of trying to achieve. So certain examples that have been discussed also here today is developing circular operations. A good example is by partnering, for example, with suppliers in seeing if we can extend the life of capital equipment. This is possible by way of analytics, real-time monitoring, for example, of your conveyors and your trucks. Another example is recycling and remanufacturing of end-of-life products, for example, tires. Another example that mining companies are looking to implement is innovating new circular products and services, by, for example, leasing materials, which is possible because of new modern track and trace systems. And a third example that I have heard people are looking towards achieving, perhaps Tony can speak to that, is partnering with your customers and trying to see whether you can build a circular ecosystem by both sort of advocating for regulatory regimes that will enable circular principles that will support the industry. And I'm sure we will hear what role government has to play in this regard. But let me get closer to Vedanta. As you mentioned, I'm General Counsel for Vedanta Zinc in Southern Africa. An example from our business where we have tried to incorporate circular principles is our aluminium business. We produce more than half of the aluminium in India at our Jharsuguda and Balco smelters. And what we've done there is to partner with a company called Renea Refining and a technological company called Taha International in an attempt to not only improve aluminium recovery, but also to use a byproduct, aluminium dross, for more useful purposes. So the partnership has resulted in the production of briquettes that is used as slag conditioner in the steel industry. So there's an example of something innovative that has happened with a byproduct that would have been casted away in the past. We have also produced green product lines in our aluminium business, of which the GHG emissions are below industry standard, called Restora and Restora Ultra. And just as a last example of embracing circularity in producing the first batch of these green metal products, we have used almost 2 billion units of renewable energy, making Vedanta the largest industrial consumer of renewable energy in India. So I think we've made a good start. Innovation is obviously quite important in reimagining how business will be done. It will not be business as usual. But I think we've embarked on this journey, and looking forward to hearing what other speakers are saying they are achieving in this space. Thanks, Konrad.
Thank you, Hermien. I mean, best practice sharing of ideas, exactly, I think, the purpose of coming together here in this conference. Mark, and maybe you can take us further. I mean, your company, ArcelorMittal, is in the way unique that you cover the mining stage and the subsequent stage in the value chain. What benefits and examples of the circular economy are you seeing, and what are you doing at ArcelorMittal?
So I think let's frame the context in terms of where we are globally and the global challenges that the world faces right now. Obviously, we have climate change, which is a high priority. We also have biodiversity loss, which is also high on the agenda, and securement in terms of critical minerals and metals for the economic, I guess, green transition that we're all embarking on. And I think the circular economy can really help achieve those goals. I'll split the answer into, I guess, from a company perspective and then also from, I guess, a regional perspective, because I think the circular economy is one of those unique concepts, elegant concept that actually, when applied, can essentially meet the triple bottom line goals, both for company as well as regions. So in terms of benefits, I mean, very simply, there's obviously the financial benefit in terms of applying the circular economy through pure efficiencies in terms of what is done, but as well potential for additional new revenue streams that weren't realized or explored to be taken advantage of. A great example on the steel side is part of our steel making process. We've essentially have identified that a carbon-rich gas, which was historically a waste product, could actually be transformed into bioethanol using a microbe. And that we essentially have developed in partnership with a company called LanzaTech. And I think, I could be mistaken, but I think they've just raised $500 million, if I'm not mistaken. It was a sizable amount. The great thing about that is that, very simply, we've turned now a waste product into a new revenue stream in terms of bioethanol. And I think the last projections I saw, and this knowledge is all public, I think they're estimating about 75 million euros annually from that in terms of sales of that bioethanol, as well as potential other products that can be created from it. We also have some examples on our slag side in terms of using the slag for, I guess, amendments to soils to increase yield of crops, as well as other innovative uses in terms of road construction and even some potential restoration of reefs. So on the financial side, there's obviously the efficiencies that improve profit margins as well as new revenue streams. On the environmental, I guess, part of the triple bottom line, there's environmental reduction in environmental liabilities. In addition, helping us move towards our net zero ambitions. It helps on that front in terms of the avoidance of waste, in terms of transitioning to cleaner energies. In addition, it also does two things on the biodiversity side. It obviously reduces the impact that would have to happen in terms of biodiversity, but then also on the regeneration side, we're well aware that some sort of offsetting will need to take place, and very simply by applying this principle, we should be able to regenerate or at least focus on enhancing biodiversity in some areas. And then lastly but not least is in terms of the social impact, the circular economy is one of those unique concepts that is applied across industries and can only work when linked with other industries. And by doing that, you unlock opportunities that probably would have been missed. And how that benefits local regions is very simply, if you can imagine, right now we work quite siloed in terms of the resources that we extract from the ground. One person's waste is another person's treasure. And if we can spend a bit more time characterizing and exploring uses for that waste product that we consider waste in terms of a mining company, it may actually unlock other potential opportunities within the region in different industries. So that's why I'm such a big proponent of the circular economy. I really think it's this incredibly elegant but powerful tool that can help us achieve numerous goals that we obviously face today globally.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Malcolm. I'm really overwhelmed and I'm very impressed by the multitude of examples that you all are quoting and citing. Nevertheless, we all know we need to go faster, further in this, and the role of innovation will be key in that question. Can you speak a little bit about sort of what innovation will be needed, how the mining industry should think about achieving that, with whom they should partner, what are promising fields?
Yeah, very, very happy to. The first thing I would like to say is that this is refreshing. I mean, hearing how we are defining the circular economy now in this panel, it shows the evolution. I mean, if we would have had this conversation a year ago, I mean, the conversation would be only about recycling. And 5 years ago, maybe this panel wouldn't exist, you know, because what's the role of minerals and metals in the circular economy? We have that funny circular with a tail that needs to disappear. So I think this level of sophistication is really needed. And it really makes me think about the journey on climate. Like 10 years ago, I think mining companies will be seen as no role in climate, that suddenly they have a critical role. Now we have the most critical role in the climate journey. And I wouldn't be surprised if the same happens with the circular economy in 3-5 years, where we realize that this is about resource productivity, and we are resource companies. So suddenly we are at the center of this. So that's why it's so exciting to have this panel today. I would like to go very philosophical. I mean, Gareth, I completely agree with you that the R that really matters is rethink. And when we think about the mining industry, the way we define ourselves is we are mining a resource that is finite. We're an extractive industry that mines a final resource. Is that true? Can we think about the process of mining as regenerative, as having a positive impact? And is copper a finite resource? It's finite in the natural stock, but does it go to space? It remains with us forever. The copper is a renewable resource. So if we think fundamental questions about where can we go, how do we see ourselves by 2040, then all the toys and technologies will come and they will fit in a different stream. But we need to make these fundamental and to some degree existential questions. Who are we? You know? The way I like to think about the mining industry or a mining company is it's a company that has some critical capabilities and skills for the future of this world. And obviously I represent the industry and people may say, well, of course you're going to define it that way. But let me step back and describe it and share this with you. So mining companies are companies that can raise capital very efficiently, large amounts, allocated in incredibly complex operations in very difficult geographies and work globally. And they do it in a way that benefits society, works with the environment, and in collaboration with a number of partners. Now, we need to get much better at that, but in principle, that's what the industry tries to do. Very large organizations raising capital very efficiently, very complex projects, large portfolios in very difficult geographies. That's what we need in renewable energy. That's what we need in recycling. That is what we need in natural-based solutions. That is what we need in everything. So by 2040, by 2050, those characteristics are a must. So if we think about us, the mining industry, not as an extractive industry that is mining a limited or a finite resource, but as an industry with key skills and capabilities that can turn an operation into a net positive contribution for communities and the environment, aligning outcomes, and providing a resource that can be recovered forever, then we will have a circular economy at a global scale. And I think the mining industry has a key role to play in that.
It's a very interesting and paradigm shift of how we look at the mining industry. Now, Tony, when you think from the role of governments, it's been typically about, as we heard speeches earlier today, about come to our country, we have a great resource base, we have a great infrastructure, we have great people. How would that challenge that Christian put down change or impact the role of government that you see?
I don't think it does change. I think we're agreed. I hear a lot of consensus on this panel. And I see the role of government really as having 4 key objectives. The first is to fundamentally steer the course to the future where sustainability is the heart of our economy. So really it's a sustainable economy rather than a circular economy. Circularity is the mechanism by which we do that. If we pick up on your point, Konrad, that the population growth. So in 1800, the population of the world was about 1 billion. This month, I understand, population passed 8 billion. In that 200 and something years of growth, it correlates too with the Industrial Revolution and the growth in global trade. And with that economic development, we've also seen impacts and contamination, and where the environment has subsidised those activities, such that we've incurred a debt subsidised by the environment, resulting in damage to the atmosphere and also to the biosphere, to the land and the seas and the waterways which rely upon life itself. So we have to restore that balance as well. So it's not just a matter of steering the course to the future and recycling, repurposing. It's actually restoring natural capital too. So there's a huge task for governments around the world to drive that course to the future. In doing that, I think it's really important that government provides, or governments collectively provide, absolute clarity on what needs to be done. So for the extractive industries that we work in, it is that focus on the footprint of mining and extraction. That is the primary area of focus. We must have vision across the value chain, across everything that we do with the material that's been removed from the mine itself, or the quarry, whatever, through that value chain, particularly to where we interact with investors, customers and consumers. What are their needs and demands? So there's that immediacy around the site itself, also the value chain. Governments too need to provide leadership in key areas. So technology, innovation clearly have their part to play. We need to know what they're doing. What's the forefront of activity in that area? Environment. As I mentioned, we have to restore, not damage the environment, but restore natural capital too. It's actually returning back to the environment. And the commercial sense, what are the commercial levers, mechanisms, impediments that will either help or hinder industry finding solutions to the challenges that we face? Organisational and accreditation. Who are the bodies and the groups? And we've heard some today in previous panels around the diversity of frameworks and so on. Who are those frameworks that we can rely upon, we should make standard? And also the accreditation. How do we prove our credentials? How does the company prove that it's doing the right thing, to use that term? So that I think is fundamentally important. And for government, we need to distill that down into policy. What are the policies we should put in place, the rules, the framework of rules to drive us towards that future economy?
Thank you, Tony. One group of stakeholders we haven't talked about as much yet, investors. Gareth, from your perspective as a senior executive chairman, now investor as well, what's investors' view on mining companies and circular economies? What would an investor say if somebody now went into a recycling business or secondary business lines that had significantly lower margin than their core business?
Konrad, just by the way, just reflect on something, Tony. It's great to see the consensus in approach here on what needs to be done in terms of our sector. I mean, the mining community need to be seen not as part of the problem, but as critical to the solution. And I think, Christian, you talked about some of the skills, etc., that exist. I mean, those are absolutely central, I think, to the way forward. How do the finance, obviously I can speak for 91, I can't speak for the general industry, but 91's approach to the mining and extractive industry has been actually exactly what is being espoused on this panel, is to say that we think that it's part of the future. We haven't adopted what is sometimes called a portfolio purity approach, where you just get rid of your investments in BHP or Rio or Anglo or whoever. And then you go, there you are, job done. We have a zero carbon footprint. Brilliant. But actually you've done absolutely nothing to change the direction or course of this world. You haven't decarbonized, you haven't helped anybody on the journey, you haven't transferred knowledge, you haven't handheld anybody or anything to move to a better place. And we took a decision a little while ago. We put out it's an interesting thing to read, quite aside from 91, called No One Left Behind. There's a white paper that 91 put out about end of last year, which I think is quite seminal. And it talks to this whole issue of don't just jettison your involvement in a portfolio, rather identify the issue, engage with each individual underlying investment and work with them on a plan. Now you may get to a point where that journey can't be traveled anymore, and you're going to have to take a position in X number of months or years that says we've tried our best, we cannot work with company A, we're going to offload that particular investment. No doubt that there will be such cases, but overwhelmingly, What we're trying to do with a relatively small number of companies, but a disproportionate percentage of our carbon footprint, is we're working with each of them in a very engaged way to find a solution on this road to net zero. So we've committed to just under half of a 50% reduction, nearly, not, I mean, I think 46 is the number, in terms of our carbon footprint by 2030. We're part of the Asset Managers Net Zero Initiative, so we've got to conform with all that. But as I say, we've adopted the approach that we will invest in mining companies and we want them to be part of the solution.
Thank you, Gareth. Maybe I open it up at this moment for a few questions in the audience, if you have any. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll continue here on the panel. But, just wanted to give you the opportunity. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Zandi from ICMM. What is, I don't know, I guess open to the whole panel, but what do you think is sort of the public's or just general people's barrier to seeing mining as part of the solution? I think that's, I mean, I think about it in terms of when you think circular economy, I don't immediately, and I've been in the mining industry for a little bit, but like I don't immediately think mining company. How do you think that that we can, as an industry, try to break down those barriers just for that, but also just in general to what Gareth was saying about seeing ourselves as part of that solution? How can you try to break down those barriers?
Konrad, do you want to take that for the ICMM or?
we have rehearsals. Thank you, Sandy. Look, I mean, there is again a fundamental question here, and also going back to Gareth. I mean, if we go back to philosophy, right, and we ask who we are, then we also need to ask, you know, how the finance world works. You know, there is a risk, there is a return, right? We can price the risk if we know, you know, the operation. So we know how a mine operates today. So we can see how risky that operation is, and we will reflect that in how expensive the capital, you know, gets provided to that. But if we say that we're going to be migrating to something that looks extremely different, or even what many mining companies are trying to do, which is applicating a significant amount of new technologies to reduce the footprint, to become waterless, to become fully renewable energy, you know, that doesn't sound like the thing that we know. It's unknown. And the further we go in time, and the more we align with what society wants, it's more unknown. So if we want to allocate capital to something that is unknown, but we're going to penalize it by asking them increasingly amount of returns, that doesn't work. So we need to rethink finance. So mining needs to rethink themselves, and they are doing so on the process side. It's very clear that they're doing so. We need to think about our product, not as a finite resource, but one that can be recovered forever. But everything that goes around needs to be rethought. So finance, policy, customers.
You just made it harder. We were beginning to rethinking the mining industry. Now you want us to rethinking finance
but that's
too,
the circular economy is a design question.
Yeah.
So the question is, what is the design that we want at the end? And that would address the question that Sandy is making. So if we think about the end state, and we are able to describe that end state that aligns the outcomes with society and environment and business, then we can break the barriers. But it's just a little bit of recycling here and a little bit of efficiency there, and we keep the same system. We're only going to see the frictions.
Yeah. Maybe Hermien and Malcolm also quickly to the question, how do you see from the company perspective, what does it mean become part of the solution?
Yeah, I was actually wanting to quote an example from Vedanta. In our zero waste ambition, I think that communities are starting to see that we are mining differently in India. So we have collaborated with research institutions in India to help us find new ways of using our waste. And in 2022, we entered into memorandums of understanding with the cement industry to offtake some of our red mud and fly ash. So I think those kind of collaborations have not been there in the past. You typically associate mining companies with large tailings dams, and when the mining company has left the site, you still see a very large footprint. I think that is changing, and it's visibly changing by way of these partnerships and by creating new local business opportunities that were not there before because mining is being done differently now in small ways, but it definitely has embarked on that sort of different journey.
So what I'll say is that I think in terms of the mining industry, I think the biggest problem we have is our reputation due to, unfortunately, the way mining was done in the past. And you can see this on the mine closure side. There's a number of examples globally in terms of literally thousands of abandoned mines that have left literally environmental scars, not only on the land, but also the surrounding communities. Now, I think in terms of the circular economy and how it can be applied to mining, I think it can really help address some of those, I guess, impacts that we essentially make as a mining industry. And I'll say in terms of, and I think this is something that's misunderstood about the circular economy, it's not just about recycling. It's actually about minimizing waste, which can also impact in terms of your journey to net zero, in terms of moving towards cleaner energies to produce. So that will help in terms of climate change and help us move towards that goal that is needed. It will obviously help against biodiversity loss through more recycling downstream. Obviously, we'll need less disturbance of virgin lands, but at the same time on the closure side, and I'm excited about this, hopefully it actually comes through, but I know there's some pilot studies going out there in terms of trying to create a biodiversity credit system, which is quite novel. If they actually do that and it becomes something similar to the carbon credit system, now you fundamentally have changed incentives in terms of what is attractive financially. And I think that will change actions. So if you could imagine, suddenly companies are now incentivized to do something different. You could actually have enhancement of the environment, which is interesting. So it really helps address those issues on the environmental side. On the social side, the biggest challenge at closure, one of the biggest challenges is actually the social economic transition. And not due to, I guess, solely fault of the mining industry, but many times a region actually appears because of the mining industry and becomes incredibly, I guess, singular in terms of the economic drivers in that region. By essentially exploring the ore body more holistically and not seeing everything else besides the commodity we're after as waste, there's potentially other opportunities that could help spur diversification of economic growth within that region, which means when the mine closes eventually, which it will, potentially there's opportunities there for the communities to essentially carry on with their lifestyles. So hopefully that answers your questions. I have a lot more to say. Happy to speak to you about this afterwards, something I'm very passionate about. But in my mind, I see in the future, and it's probably, hopefully this is what Gareth will have to compare in the future. But if we had company A that just continues to do business as usual, but then company B actually doing their business as usual with the circular economy, and I see it as an evolution of mining rather than a complete rethink. Hopefully company B is just obviously the better business decision, because not only do you have the normal returns in terms of business as usual, but you probably have better social license to operate, not just now, but in the future and in different regions. You probably have better support from the government, which Tony will probably agree with. In addition to that, you probably have better returns because you may have additional revenue streams, like I mentioned on the steel side, that have come about. In addition to that, just due to the circularity as it is, you probably have more efficiencies in your process that you have actually
Thank you, Malcolm.
maximized.
Just have to, I think, bring in for final landing. I'm sure we could have continued. A very quick question to each of you. You have, I think, 30 seconds left each. What is the most important single action that you would suggest a mining company takes today to prepare themselves and get on the way in the circular economy?
A mindset shift. I think we've heard it here today, but there are those companies who aren't in that space yet. So thinking that is the way of the future.
Mindset shift.
Yeah.
I mean?
My answer has been stolen. No, it is thinking beyond your mind sight and thinking beyond only the company and the shareholders in that company and what you're there to achieve for them. So it's about, yes, a mindset change, but what does that involve? thinking about your local communities and sort of what is going to be left behind after you've stopped mining.
Think beyond the mine side.
Yeah.
Christian?
As a miner, I would say, think about the materials that are going to the market and that as a growing mine. So all the materials that are going into the electric vehicles, batteries, and renewable, that's a growing stock of minerals, and thinking about the miner that can reach to that and keep extracting value from that.
So don't think just beyond the mine gate, nothing. It's interested. Think about the stock and how you engage and manage that. Markham?
I'll say something very practical. Find a champion within your organization, support them, give them a mandate and the freedom to explore. This isn't typical business as usual. And find partners to help de-risk so that you can actually go explore.
Nourishing growth and talent and people and partners. Yeah. Gareth?
So rethink is my first one, and I was going to say partnership is the second, and they've both been taken, but so we're clearly on the same page.
Very good. Thank you to all panelists. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to the organizers for giving us the floor to advance this important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.